When a building collapses, we don't look at the rubble and blame the people inside for being too heavy.
No, of course not. That would be ridiculous.
Right. We don't say, well, they should have just stood differently, or maybe they should have held their breath to accommodate the weak floorboards.
Exactly. I mean, if a bridge fails, engineers don't critique the driving style of the commuters.
Yeah, they check the blueprints,
Yeah.
they look at the load-bearing columns, they ask why the structural integrity, fundamentally failed to support the actual human beings it was supposed to hold.
They interrogate the system itself to find out where the math went wrong.
But for decades, when it came to the modern workplace, and specifically when dealing with human minds that process the world differently, we did the exact opposite.
We really did.
If someone couldn't survive the corporate environment, we essentially blamed the person. We told them to fit into a system that was fundamentally not built to hold their weight.
Which is, frankly, the absolute definition of a structural failure disguised as a personal deficit.
100%. We just told them, well, you are the problem.
And for a very long time, organizations have forced individuals to bear this immense psychological and professional weight of what is just a broken, outdated design.
And that brings us directly to the core of what we're unpacking today for you, the listener.
Yep.
Because we are diving into a paradigm shift that is actively rewriting the rules of the modern workforce.
It really is a massive shift.
Yeah. So today's deep dive is based on a really comprehensive assessment of the INWAIF Neurodiversity Governance Checklist version 2.0.
Which is such a fascinating document.
It is. And our mission today is to explore this profound narrative shift. We are moving the conversation about neurodiversity away from this realm of charity and planting it firmly into structural governance.
Because the documentation we're looking at, it evaluates this framework as a truly revolutionary national standard for the 21st century workplace.
Yeah, it's not just a nice to have anymore.
Right. As we transition deeper into the fourth industrial revolution, I mean, the way we manage human capital just has to evolve. Historically, workplace neurodiversity was handled through what advocates call the medical model.
Okay, let's unpack this right away, because the medical model is something that, even if you haven't heard the term, you have definitely experienced it if you've ever worked in a traditional office.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
It's highly reactive, it's person-centered, but like in the worst possible way. It relies entirely on accommodations.
That is the defining feature of the old system. Under the medical model, the corporate environment is basically considered perfect.
Right. It's the neutral default.
Exactly. And if you, as an employee, fall outside of this very narrow neurotypical bandwidth of functioning, well, you are viewed as the anomaly.
You're the broken part.
You have a deficit that needs to be accommodated. So the burden of fixing the friction between you and the environment falls entirely on your shoulders.
Which means you have to pay what the sources call the disclosure tax. And I really want to drill down into what this actually feels like for you listening right now, whether you're navigating this yourself or managing someone who is.
It's a heavy burden.
It really is. Think about the administrative and, frankly, psychological burden placed on a neurodivergent employee. You don't just get to, show up on a Monday morning and do your job.
No, first you have to realize you're actively struggling with the environment.
Right. And then you have to weigh the political risk of actually disclosing your neurodivergence to your employer.
Right.
Is it safe? Like, will it hurt your chances for a promotion?
And even if you decide it is safe, well, the process has really only just begun.
Exactly. Then you have to formally ask for help. You have to fill out all the paperwork.
You have to justify to human resources and often to a manager who has zero training in neurodiversity why you need basic tools just to function.
You basically have to beg for a seat at the table. You have to prove over and over again why you need a quieter desk or a specific piece of software or written instructions instead of vague verbal commands. It is exhausting.
It absolutely drains the exact cognitive energy that the employee should be using to perform their actual role.
Yeah, they're spending all their energy just trying to survive the office.
Right. But the core thesis of NWAF version 2.0 completely dismantles that dynamic. It shifts the paradigm to this environment-first design philosophy.
Which is such a great term. Environment first.
Yes. The rallying cry of the whole framework is basically fixing the system, not the person. By treating cognitive accessibility as essential, non-negotiable infrastructure, it systematically eliminates that administrative friction.
It kills the disclosure tax entirely.
Really?
So Here is how I process this shift. It's like the difference between constantly downloading individual custom patches for a buggy software
Oh,
program
it's a good way to look at it.
versus just completely wiping the hard drive and installing a brand new, stable operating system built to handle all types of code natively.
Yes, exactly.
In the old way, every time someone needed a noise-canceling headset, it was like writing a custom patch for a feeling system. But Enway says, stop patching the bugs. This is the new operating system.
And what's really fascinating here is how this operating system compares to other major milestones in accessibility. To truly understand why NWAVE is being evaluated as the first national operational standard, the research contrasts it against other established instruments.
Like the British Standards Institution's PAS 6463.2022.
Right, specifically that one.
Which, I mean, is a massive deal in its own right. The BSI doesn't just put out standards on a whim.
Not at all. BSI PAS 6463 is a genuinely groundbreaking document. It's widely recognized as the first building design standard produced by a national standards body anywhere in the world to specifically address sensory needs.
Wow, anywhere in the world.
Yes, but its scope is intentionally limited to the built environment.
Meaning the physical space itself, the actual architecture.
Precisely. It deals with lighting lux levels, acoustics, spatial layout, and wayfinding. It's designed to manage the physical and cognitive load a person experiences when they physically walk into a building.
So the target audience there is architects and urban planners.
Right, and facilities managers. It ensures the physical container of the workplace doesn't actively harm the people inside it.
Okay, so PAS 6463 is literally the physical blueprint. It tells you, where to put the walls so the acoustics don't bounce around and overwhelm someone with sensory processing differences.
Exactly.
But that physical blueprint leaves a massive gap. Because, I mean, you can build the most sensory-friendly, perfectly lit, acoustically balanced office in the entire world.
But if the manager inside that building is legally allowed to penalize an employee for a lack of eye contact, the building's design is useless.
Exactly. The nice lighting doesn't save you from a bad manager.
And that is the exact gap that Enway fills. While PAS 6463 provides the blueprints for a sensory-inclusive building, Enway provides the blueprints for the operational, legal, and behavioral reality that happens inside that building.
It is the behavioral architecture.
Right. It targets leadership, HR professionals, risk teams, middle management.
That distinction is so crucial. And to really understand how this behavioral architecture actually governs a company, we have to look at its structural code.
The sources break it down into 5 distinct layers.
Yeah, but we aren't going to start at the top with the individual employee. We have to start at the absolute bottom, the bedrock.
Because you have to build the foundation first.
Right, because if we are talking about shifting from charity to governance, we have to explore what makes this system legally mandatory rather than just, a nice corporate suggestion.
So let's delve into Layer 5.
Let's do it, layer 5.
Layer 5 is identified in the framework's structural cutaway as the blue layer. It represents governance, culture, and accountability. And if this foundational layer is weak or missing, well, everything else built on top of it. The training, the sensory rooms, the hiring initiatives, it's all just performative inclusion.
It's just PR at that point.
Exactly. Layer 5 anchors the entire system in hard legal necessity. It utilizes frameworks like the UK Equality Act 2010, but crucially, it integrates the European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR.
See, the moment I read that in the sources, I had to pause. I am very used to hearing about the Equality Act, or the ADA in the U.S., in standard workplace compliance training.
It's pretty standard HR stuff.
Right. But escalating workplace neurodiversity policy to the level of the European Convention on Human Rights, that moves the conversation from standard HR liability into the realm of fundamental human dignity.
It forces organizations to reckon with the actual human cost of their policies.
Right.
The framework specifically references ECHR Article 8, which guarantees the right to private life.
Okay.
And even more severely, it brings in Article 3, which is the prohibition of degrading treatment.
Let's really drill down into Article 3, the prohibition of degrading treatment. Because how does a corporate policy about neurodiversity intersect with a human rights article designed to prevent degrading treatment?
It sounds extreme at first.
It does. On the surface, a strict office dress code or loud open-plan office doesn't sound like a human rights violation to the average person.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture of the neurodivergent experience, the connection becomes undeniable. The research points out the profound psychological harm caused by forcing an employee to mask.
Masking. We need to define that.
Masking is the process where a neurodivergent individual is forced to suppress their natural neurological responses and perform expected neurotypical behaviors just to survive the workday.
Just to avoid professional retaliation.
Exactly.
It's essentially forcing someone to run a complex software emulation of an entirely different personality, all day, every day, while also trying to do their actual job.
And when an organization places someone in a sensory hostile environment, denies them support, and subjects them to what the source material brilliantly calls the violence of technicism, it inflicts profound systemic humiliation.
The violence of technicism. That is such a heavy, evocative phrase.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it?
It paints a picture of a brutal, unfeeling enforcement of arbitrary systemic rules. It's the manager who says, I don't care if the fluorescent lights give you migraines. Corporate policy says no hats or sunglasses in the office.
Right. It's the rigid adherence to a bureaucratic procedure that actively crushes the individual's ability to function.
And WAF recognizes that legally, forcing an employee into that position of constant distress and masking can be interpreted as a form of degrading treatment under Article 3.
Yes. By anchoring the framework here, an organization isn't just saying, we want to be a friendly place to work.
No, they're legally acknowledging if we force our employees to pretend to be someone else just to exist in our ecosystem, we are violating their fundamental human rights.
It shifts the corporate motivation completely. It moves away from empathy, which, as we know, is fragile and subjective, and moves it to risk management and legal compliance, which are ironclad.
But the framework doesn't just look backward at traditional office setups, right? It looks aggressively forward into modern threats.
And here's where it gets really pressing.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting and honestly a little alarming if you think about the direction corporate technology is heading.
Yeah.
Under Layer 5, there's an intense focus on digital risk governance.
Which is arguably the most critical addition for the 21st century workplace. Because we are currently living in an era dominated by algorithmic hiring platforms and pervasive workplace monitoring tools.
Everywhere you look, software is tracking productivity, it's tracking keystrokes, it's analyzing mouse movement.
AI hiring platforms are analyzing eye contact, facial expressions, and vocal inflection during video interviews.
And the sources highlight that neurodivergent individuals face an incredibly high risk of algorithmic discrimination from these tools.
Oh, massive risk. Because those algorithms are trained on neurotypical data sets, so they interpret a lack of eye contact as, say, deceptive or unengaged.
Rather than what it might actually be, a standard autistic trait or an ADHD focusing mechanism.
Exactly. And the long-term consequence of this systemic algorithmic bias is a concept the framework refers to as digital scarring.
Digital scarring. If you are listening to this and you work in a digitized corporate environment, just think about what this means for your career.
It's a terrifying concept.
It is. If you have a bad quarter because your sensory environment was hostile, or if your neurodivergent traits cause a breakdown in communication that gets formally logged by HR performance software, that data point doesn't just go away.
No, it lives in the system forever. It gets scraped, it gets analyzed by succession planning algorithms, and it follows you.
So NWAFERI introduces a radical concept to fight this, the right to be forgotten in the workplace.
Yes. It adapts a concept primarily known in consumer data privacy like GDPR and applies it internally to employee capability and disciplinary records.
Okay, I have to push back here. I am going to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because I know executives who would hear this and immediately panic. In an era where corporate HR software automatically logs every single performance metric, every behavioral quirk, how realistic is it to actually implement an internal right to be forgotten?
It sounds difficult from an IT perspective.
Right. If an employee has a meltdown because of sensory overload and it causes a major project delay, how does a massive corporation actually unring that bell once the algorithm has decided the employee is a high-risk liability? Doesn't data governance demand that we keep accurate records?
And that is exactly the pushback you would expect from traditional risk management, and honestly, it is a very valid critique.
So how does Layer 5 handle it?
It addresses this not by suggesting we pretend history didn't happen, but by structurally changing how data is governed and utilized moving forward. It isn't just about literally deleting a file and burning the hard drive.
Okay, so what is it doing?
It's about altering the governance of how past data is allowed to influence future capability reviews.
Oh, I see. So you aren't erasing the past. You are quarantining it.
Precisely. The framework implements proactive reporting routes and strict leadership metrics to mitigate long-term career harm. The goal is to ensure that a single period of struggle, especially one caused by the organization's own failure to provide appropriate environmental support at the time, doesn't permanently ruin an individual's career trajectory.
It stops the data from weaponizing itself down the line.
Exactly. It ensures that an algorithm can't look at a rough patch from 3 years ago and automatically flag someone as not management material.
When the reality was that 3 years ago, the employee was just dealing with an untreated burnout caused by the company's own, violence of technicism.
Right. This foundational layer replaces luck with structure. By legally mandating psychological safety and ensuring there is zero retaliation for disclosure, the framework creates an environment where people can actually perform.
Instead of spending all their cognitive load trying to satisfy a biased monitoring tool.
Exactly. It provides the operational manual for actual compliance with those high-level ECHR legal principles we talked about.
Okay, so Layer 5 lays down the law. It builds the legal bedrock, it protects against digital scarring, and it establishes that cognitive inclusion is a fundamental human right.
It sets the stage perfectly.
But an organization is made of human beings. Once the legal foundation dictates that the organization must protect its employees, how does that actually translate to the people enforcing the rules on a random Tuesday morning?
That is the big question.
Because you can have the best policy in the world sitting in an HR binder, but it is completely useless if the manager on the ground doesn't follow it.
Which leads us perfectly into the operational reality of the next architectural level, Layer 4.
The orange layer.
Yes, this is the human interface, and the primary objective of this layer is the total eradication of what the sources identify as the manager lottery.
The manager lottery. I mean, even if you have never heard that specific phrase, if you ever held a job, you know exactly what it is.
Everyone has experienced it.
You join a company. If you pull a winning ticket, you get a manager who is empathetic. A manager who listens to your needs, who lets you wear your headphones to focus, who understands that you need written follow-ups.
And who judges you strictly by your actual output.
Yes, and under that manager, your career thrives.
But if you pull a losing ticket...
Oh man, if you pull a losing ticket, you get a manager who insists on rigid, arbitrary rules. A manager who thinks your need for clear instructions is you having a bad attitude or being difficult.
A manager who demands constant eye contact, aggressive networking, and values face time at the desk over actual productivity.
In that scenario, your career is completely derailed, regardless of what the shiny corporate HR brochure says about diversity.
And historically, traditional corporate structures have allowed this to happen because manager support has largely been viewed as discretionary.
Meaning they could just choose not to help.
Exactly. A bad manager could derail a career simply by exercising discretionary refusal of support. They could just wave away an accommodation request by saying, well, that's not how we do things on my team.
Or, I expect everyone to be in the office at 8 a.m. sharp, no exceptions.
Right. And WAFA closes this loophole entirely.
But how? Because changing human behavior, especially entrenched middle management behavior, is notoriously difficult. You can't just mandate empathy.
You're right, you don't mandate empathy, you mandate structural compliance. Section 5.2 of the checklist makes accessibility competence a mandatory measurable part of manager evaluation.
Wait, really? It's part of their evaluation?
Yes, it officially and systematically removes the option for discretionary refusal. You can no longer choose whether or not to be an inclusive leader. It is a core competency of your job description.
So if a manager fails to support a neurodivergent employee, it's not just a minor HR dispute or personality clash.
No, it is a failure of that manager's own professional performance metrics.
Wow. So a bad manager can no longer derail a career through a lack of understanding, because compliance is structurally tied to their own performance reviews and bonuses.
Exactly. Furthermore, the training pathway associated with this layer ensures managers actually understand the longitudinal reality of neurodivergence.
What does that training look like?
Well, they are trained to recognize strengths like hyperfocus and deep pattern recognition rather than just seeing differences. And they are explicitly trained to avoid mislabeling executive function challenges as laziness or insubordination.
That is a massive shift in power dynamics. It hardwires inclusion into the performance DNA of the company.
It really does.
But Layer 4 isn't just about managing the people you already have, right? It's also about how you get them through the door in the first place.
Yes, recruitment is a huge part of this layer.
And we have to talk about recruitment because this is an area where traditional corporate structures spectacularly, undeniably fail neurodivergent talent.
Section 6.2 of the framework addresses recruitment head-on. It fundamentally moves hiring away from gut feeling and social performance, steering it toward what they call a meritocracy of output.
A meritocracy of output. I love that phrasing. Let's look at the traditional unstructured interview because it is the ultimate example of a flawed gatekeeping mechanism.
It really is.
It is basically a test of neurotypical social cues disguised as a competency assessment. Just think about it for a second. You walk into a room, you have to shake a hand with the exact right firmness.
You have to maintain the exact right amount of eye contact. Not too little, which means you're hiding something.
But not too much, which makes you aggressive. You make small talk about the weather or the commute, and then you have to answer incredibly vague, open-ended questions like, tell me about a time you overcame a challenge.
And that format heavily filters out incredible talent. It filters out individuals who possess exceptional, highly specialized skills, such as extraordinarily high pattern recognition, deep technical focus, or lateral problem-solving capabilities.
Just because they don't perform well on those expected social metrics.
Exactly. They might struggle with the sheer ambiguity of the question, or the sensory overload of the bright interview room, or just the anxiety of parsing the interviewer's unspoken expectations.
So the organization loses out on a brilliant data analyst or a genius coder simply because the candidate didn't laugh at the hiring manager's joke in the exact expected rhythm. The company prioritizes charisma over capability.
Infos changes this by mandating structured, predictable recruitment environments. It advocates for work trials, where the candidate is actually given a task and demonstrates their ability to do the job.
Rather than just talking abstractly about doing the job.
Right. And crucially, it mandates providing interview questions in advance.
Okay, now, I know some hiring managers will immediately push back on that. They will say, well, if I give them the questions in advance, it's an open book test. They'll just memorize the perfect answer. I want to see how they think on their feet.
This raises an incredibly important question for any organization. What are you actually trying to measure in an interview?
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the job role, unless you are hiring for an emergency room trauma surgeon or a live television broadcaster, thinking on your feet and reacting instantly to surprise questions is almost never a requirement for daily corporate tasks.
It's just an artificial stressor.
Exactly. Providing questions in advance isn't giving someone the answers. It is removing the artificial test of working memory and rapid social processing and replacing it with a test of actual capability, depth of knowledge, and thoughtful response.
By hardwiring these practices into the recruitment structure, NWolf ensures that the organization captures the best talent, not just the best interviewees.
That's the perfect way to summarize it, capturing the best talent.
That distinction alone could save companies millions in bad hires and turnover. So, under Layer 4, we have structurally accountable managers who are evaluated on their inclusive competence, and we've brought the right talent through the door based on actual merit.
We've built the team.
Yeah, right. But what happens on day one? You have this diverse team of brilliant minds. How do they actually communicate and execute their daily tasks without massive friction?
This brings us to the operational core of the framework, Layer 3.
Layer 3. Operational architecture. And there's a concept here the sources call the UX for words.
Yes. Layer 3 addresses task and workload architecture. And you're right to highlight Standard 2.1, which introduces this concept of the UX for words. It might be one of the most profound and universally beneficial contributions of the entire NWAFO framework.
I found it fascinating.
It explicitly identifies ambiguity in communication as a major organizational productivity risk.
Ambiguity, vague instructions, unspoken expectations. This is the silent killer of productivity. The sources use a very simple example of managers saying, handle this as soon as possible and get this to me ASAP.
Right, the classic A's us up.
Let's dissect that because it perfectly illustrates where neurotypical communication completely breaks down across neurotypes. If you say ASAP to one brain, that brain interprets it as drop everything you are currently doing, skip your lunch break, and get this done in the next 45 minutes.
But if you say ASAP to a different brain, they interpret the literal words as soon as possible.
Right.
Which means put it at the top of your to-do list for tomorrow morning once your current primary task, which is also highly important, is finished.
And what happens next? The manager wanted it in an hour. The employee plans to do it tomorrow morning. In high-level government or fast-paced corporate environments, that simple discrepancy leads to missed deadlines, immense frustration, wasted budget, and failed projects.
Because different brains interpret urgency, sequence, and priority entirely differently based on vague linguistic cues.
And what is the historical outcome of that scenario? The neurodivergent employee, who logically interpreted ASAP based on their current workload, is formally labeled as having a poor attitude or being difficult or lacking urgency.
When, in reality, it was a structural failure of communication on the manager's part. They used a vague, subjective term instead of a concrete metric.
The NWOF standard mandates the total elimination of this ambiguity, right?
Yes. It requires clear, concise written follow-ups for tasks. It mandates the use of visual tools like Kanban boards or flowcharts to track progress so everyone has a shared visual understanding of where a project stands.
And it explicitly demands the elimination of verbal-only instructions. If a task is assigned, it must be documented.
It also enforces chunking large, overwhelming projects into manageable milestones and strictly enforces no surprise deadlines.
But wait, if I am a manager at a fast-paced tech startup, and I have to stop and write down every single instruction I give and update a Kanban board and document every deadline, doesn't that turn my job into a bureaucratic nightmare?
People always worry about that.
Yeah. Doesn't the UX for words essentially kill spontaneity and slow the whole company down?
It's a common fear, but the data and operational reality show the exact opposite. What slows a company down is not taking 3 minutes to write a clear email.
Right.
What slows a company down is a project failing 2 weeks later because the instructions were misunderstood, leading to days of rework, interpersonal conflict, and disciplinary meetings.
That makes perfect sense. Optimizing a workplace for executive function differences isn't just an accommodation for neurodivergence, it is universally superior project management.
Everyone benefits from clear instructions. Everyone benefits from knowing exactly when a deadline is without hidden agendas or unspoken social expectations.
That's the brilliance of it. It optimizes the user experience of corporate communication.
Mm.
By eliminating the ambiguity risk, the structural core of the organization minimizes the potential for misunderstanding.
It stops neurodivergent employees from being unfairly targeted by disciplinary actions for simple miscommunications.
And crucially, it frees up everyone's bandwidth. If you don't have to waste your cognitive energy trying to decipher the hidden social matrix of what your boss actually meant by a vague email, you can apply all that energy to your actual work output.
It is the essence of universal design applied to organizational behavior.
So clear communication protects the cognitive load of the employee. But cognitive load isn't just about the emails we receive or the words we hear. It is heavily impacted by the physical space we occupy.
A sensory environment.
Exactly. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the visual chaos of an open-plan office, the constant interruptions. This brings us to layer 2, the immediate environment and the revolutionary power of defaults.
Layer 2 of the NWFO architecture is where we see the rigorous standards of BSI PAS 6463 truly absorbed and operationalized into the daily life of the company. It focuses heavily on the sensory environment and mandates regular, structured physical audits.
Because sensory processing differences are incredibly common across almost all neurodivergent profiles. Autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, Tourette's.
Yes, very common.
And we aren't just talking about a mild preference for a quieter room. We are talking about environments that can cause acute sensory overload, severe physical exhaustion, migraines, and actual mental ill health.
The framework addresses this directly and scientifically. The audits look at acoustics, lighting, and visual clutter. For example, the research highlights that high-contrast stripes, geometric patterns, and visual glare are scientifically known to create visual fatigue and neurological discomfort for certain visual processing profiles.
So they swap those out.
Yes. The framework advocates swapping those elements out for biomorphic shapes patterns inspired by nature, which are inherently easier and less taxing for the human brain to process.
But changing the carpet pattern or fixing the buzzing light bulb is only half the battle. The real game changer in layer 2 isn't just the physical changes, it's how they deliver the sensory tools to the employees.
It's the conceptual shift from accommodations to defaults.
This raises a profoundly important question about workplace culture and power dynamics. Why do we force employees to expend their limited social and political capital just to ask for basic health and safety requirements?
We really shouldn't.
Under the old model, if you needed noise-canceling headphones to survive the overwhelming chaos of an open-plan sales floor, you had to ask for them. You had to explain why you couldn't just focus harder like everyone else.
You had to wait for budget approval. You had to be the special case.
You had to pay the disclosure tax we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
You had to out yourself as different just to get a tool to let you do your job.
Exactly. NWFL changes the paradigm entirely. Quiet zones, Access to noise-canceling headphones, and crucially, remote participation, which is specifically outlined in Section 1.2 of the checklist, are provided as default flexibilities.
Default flexibilities, I love that.
They are not requested accommodations that require medical proof. They are standard operating equipment available to anyone who needs them to optimize their output.
So you don't have to fill out a form in triplicate and have an awkward meeting with HR to explain that the noise of the office makes it physically painful for you to write your code.
No, the headphones are just there in the supply closet. The quiet room is just an option you can book on the calendar.
The option to work from home on a day where your sensory threshold is low is just embedded in the team policy.
By embedding this directly into the organizational policy as a default, NWAF completely removes the stigma of special treatment. It reframes environmental control as a fundamental health and safety requirement, much like providing an ergonomic chair.
And from a purely operational standpoint, it eliminates a massive amount of administrative friction. The sources specifically cite the benefit of this for large, complex organizations like the UK Civil Service.
Right, imagine the administrative nightmare and cost of processing, reviewing, and approving thousands of individual accommodation requests. Providing default flexibilities is simply more efficient.
It recognizes that for many brilliant minds, the biggest barrier to their daily productivity isn't the complexity of the work itself. It's the sensory toll of the morning commute and surviving the sensory assault of the open-plan office before they even boot up their computer.
Absolutely.
So, if we step back and look at the structure we've built so far, we have the legal bedrock protecting human rights and digital data at Layer 5. We have managers trained, structurally accountable, and hiring based on true merit at Layer 4.
We have clear, unambiguous operational communication at Layer 3.
And we have a sensory-optimized physical environment running on defaults at Layer 2. Finally, we reach the apex of the architecture, the very top of the cutaway model.
The individual human being at the center of it all.
Let's look at Layer 1.
Layer 1 is the individual loop, and it exists to address a massive, glaring failure in how traditional human resources departments handle workplace adjustments. The failure to recognize the longitudinal reality of human beings.
The longitudinal reality, meaning human beings are not static. We change over time. Our health fluctuates, our environments change, our responsibilities shift.
Yet traditional workplace needs assessments, or W&As, are almost universally treated as a one-time event, a snapshot.
Right. You get hired, you disclose a need, you have an assessment with an occupational health professional, you are given a specific chair and a piece of dictation software, and that file is closed and put in a drawer.
But neurodivergent traits and how those traits interact with changing environments, fluctuating stress levels, or changing project demands are not static. What an employee needs in year 1 of their career might be completely different from what they need in year 3 when they are managing a team or dealing with a personal life event.
So NWAF introduces the 7-step model to replace the static snapshot. And the core of this model is a brilliant psychological reframing.
It really is.
Instead of a medical professional poking and prodding to find out what is wrong with you and how to mitigate your deficits, the 7-step model asks a very simple, empowering question.
What helps you do your best work?
What helps you do your best work? It focuses entirely on output, strengths, and support. This aligns perfectly with the social model of disability, which is a crucial philosophical underpinning of this entire framework.
Yes. The social model posits that an individual is not inherently disabled by their neurological condition or difference. They are disabled by the environment and the systemic barriers placed in front of them by society.
The framework centers the employee as the ultimate expert in their own neurobiology.
And it treats the solutions. Things like specialized assistive technology, speech-to-text software, specialized note-taking support, or visual planners, not as special corporate favors, but as standard output-maximizing tools.
Just like giving a construction worker a power drill instead of handing them a manual screwdriver. You just want them to build the house as efficiently as possible.
Exactly. But here is the critical failure point in traditional companies. What happens when that employee, who finally has all their support dialed in, gets promoted? Or what if a reorganization happens and they get moved to a different department with a new manager? Do they have to start the whole agonizing process of proving their needs over again?
Under the old medical model, yes, they often did. A new manager might come in and say, I don't care what the old manager let you do, we don't do work from home on my team, which caused massive anxiety, loss of productivity, and high attrition rates.
But Layer 1 introduces the concept of the adjustment passport.
Right, because the individual loop requires consistent documentation and predictable, regular reviews. It creates a living, binding document, a passport, that travels with the employee across different roles, teams, and departments.
It legally protects their career continuity. The new manager doesn't get to override the passport. It provides psychological safety because the employee knows their support infrastructure is permanent.
It's a huge relief for the employee. So what does this all mean for the bottom line? Because businesses ultimately run on metrics and profit margins. We've talked extensively about human rights, we've talked about structural fairness, we've talked about lowering anxiety.
But does it save money?
Right. If you are pitching this to a board of directors, does this massive structural overhaul actually keep people in their jobs and save the company money?
The data provided in the sources regarding retention is incredibly stark and compelling. The UK average retention rate for employees across standard environments is roughly 66%.
Okay, 66%.
But when you look at organizations that are running highly structured, supportive neurodiversity programs, the sources cite DXC technology as a prime real-world example of this. Those retention rates skyrocket to as high as 92%.
Wait, 66% compared to 92%.
Yes.
Let's just sit with that for a second. That is a staggering difference. If you manage a large organization, that is the difference between constantly bleeding institutional knowledge and spending millions of dollars on continuous recruitment, interviewing, and onboarding versus building a fiercely loyal, highly experienced workforce.
The financial cost of replacing an employee is universally understood to be massive. By increasing retention to 92%, you aren't just saving HR costs, you are retaining deep, specialized talent that understands your company's systems intimately.
It means that the internal experience of the employee, how they feel, how they process their workday, how safe they are from systemic barriers, is no longer viewed as a soft HR metric.
It is now treated as a critical, highly measurable asset that must be protected and nurtured for the financial health of the company.
It is the ultimate data-driven realization of fixing the system, not the person. But as we know, a beautiful theory, even a legally sound and highly profitable one, is completely useless without enforcement.
Accountability is key.
An organization can put out a press release saying they are running this NWAF operating system, but how do they actually prove it? And more importantly, what happens when the system inevitably breaks down and an employee starts failing?
This brings us to the crucial elements of measurability, accountability, and procedural justice.
Right. Because without rigorous metrics, inclusion is just a vague corporate PR goal. It's a nice paragraph on the About Us page of the company website.
NWAFA makes it a hard, verifiable data point. The framework is operationally measurable through a massive, comprehensive 150-point assessment index.
150 points.
Yes, and it spans across all 5 domains we just discussed. The individual loop, the immediate environment, the operational architecture, the human interface, and governance.
Organizations don't just get a rubber stamp. They have to move through a rigorous 5-step accreditation flow. They start with the index to see where they stand, they move through targeted training, they ensure alignment across all departments, they undergo independent verification, and finally, they achieve the award.
And the outcomes are categorized into distinct accreditation tiers.
Tell me about the tiers.
The tiers provide clear benchmarking for stakeholders. A score of 0 to 49 places an organization in the baseline tier. This represents the initial stage of awareness. It's mostly reactive compliance, likely still operating under the old medical model. A score of 50 to 99 is the developing tier, where we see active implementation of the framework elements and the building of internal competency.
Then you cross the threshold. A score of 100 to 129 means the organization is compliant. They are officially meeting the national standards for digital safety, environmental design, and managerial training.
And finally, a score of 130 to 150 is the exemplary tier. These are the industry leaders in neurogovernance, demonstrating a high level of structural stability and proactive inclusion.
It transforms diversity from a subjective feeling to a hard metric that can be reported to stakeholders, to a board of directors, to investors, or to government regulators.
It makes it real.
But as I asked earlier, we must look at the darkest timeline. What happens when an employee is failing? What happens when there is a disciplinary issue or a performance capability review? Because the sources draw a fascinating and highly complex parallel here to a legal concept called Rule 58.
This is a vital piece of the governance puzzle, and it requires some deep exploration. The sources discuss the integration of procedural justice into corporate HR, and they draw direct parallels to Rule 58, which is a concept used in various specialized UK governance contexts.
For instance, the sources mention its use in the Children and Young People Secure Estate, or CYPSE. Let's break that down. A secure estate is essentially a youth prison or detention center. Rule 58 in that context deals with disciplinary charges against the youth. Why on earth is a corporate HR framework looking at rules from a youth detention center?
Because in highly controlled, restrictive environments like a secure estate, it becomes glaringly obvious when behavior is a reaction to the environment. Rule 58 formally recognizes that traditional punishment structures like isolation or loss of privileges are often entirely unsuitable and actually counterproductive.
Because the behaviors are actually symptoms of neurodivergence, acute mental distress, or failures in the environmental structure itself.
Right. It mandates that adjudicators must consider if the young person's behavior was a manifestation of an unsupported need before applying punishment. The sources also mention Rule 58 in church governance, where it pertains to appeals that can void elections based on procedural unfairness.
So how does the underlying logic of a youth prison disciplinary rule map onto a corporate HR department?
By integrating these principles of procedural justice directly into its checklist, specifically Section 8.2, NWAVE forces the corporation to act with the same level of structural accountability.
Okay.
It mandates that internal review and capability processes, the procedures used to discipline, demote, or fire an employee, must structurally account for individual neurological differences and, crucially, environmental failures.
It ensures that a neurodivergent employee isn't disproportionately targeted or punished simply because the structural architecture of the organization failed them. Let's put this into a concrete corporate scenario so you, the listener, can truly grasp the impact. Let's say an employee is put on a performance improvement plan, a PIP, for continually missing deadlines. Under the old system, HR looks at the missed deadlines, the manager says the employee is failing, and the employee is likely fired.
Very common scenario.
But under NWEF, with procedural justice integrated, the review board has to look at the environment. If they discover that the manager was violating the Layer 3 UX for words standard by only giving vague verbal instructions in the hallway or constantly changing deadlines without visual updates on a Kanban board, the employee cannot be punished.
Because the fault lies with the manager's structural breakdown of communication, not the individual's capability to do the work.
Right. The organization must correct the structural failure by training or disciplining the manager before they can penalize the employee.
And for a CEO or a permanent secretary in a government department, this mechanism acts as a massive systemic stabilizer. It heavily reduces the risk of expensive, public, and reputation-damaging employment tribunals and litigation.
Because the system is designed to catch, audit, and correct its own structural failures internally before they destroy an employee's livelihood and trigger a lawsuit.
It's proactive risk mitigation?
The sources specifically mention the broader impact of this framework on national infrastructure, singling out the UK civil service. We know that massive government organizations are absolutely desperate to attract diverse, specialized talent because they manage incredibly diverse, complex societal issues: cybersecurity, public health, infrastructure.
But the civil service, like many massive legacy corporations, has historically struggled with a massive bias toward what the sources call confidence over competence.
It is the legacy of the old boys network style of interviewing and career progression.
Yes, the system is rigged to reward the person who speaks the loudest in meetings, who makes the most confident eye contact, who masters the art of small talk with the right executives, and who projects an aura of leadership, regardless of their actual technical output or strategic brilliance.
NWAF directly attacks this systemic bias by enforcing a true meritocracy of output at every level. It ensures that critical national infrastructure, like the civil service, can function as a high-performing department by systematically dismantling the social and bureaucratic barriers that keep diverse, brilliant minds out of leadership positions.
And when you fix that at a national level, it creates what the sources call a succession pipeline.
Imagine the next generation of talent. Students coming out of modern, neuro-inclusive educational models like the International Baccalaureate Middle Years Program, the IB-MYP framework, which focuses on teaching critical thinking, creative expression, and accommodating different learning styles.
When those students graduate and enter a workforce governed by NWAF, there is no jarring culture shock. There is a seamless transition from an inclusive education to an inclusive profession.
The workplace is structurally ready to catch them, to support them, and to fully utilize their specific brilliance, rather than forcing them to unlearn who they are to conform to an outdated neurotypical corporate mold.
So, to pull all of these complex layers together into a final synthesis, what this deep assessment of the NWAF checklist version 2.0 ultimately confirms is that governance is the absolute cornerstone of inclusion.
It truly is.
It is a revolutionary, first of its kind national standard that addresses the roots of the problem rather than the symptoms. It has successfully taken the narrative of neurodiversity out of the fragile, subjective realm of charity and empathy and placed it firmly, legally, and operationally into the realm of risk management, human rights, and operational excellence.
It replaces the arbitrary cruelty of the manager lottery with an institutionalized, measurable meritocracy.
And it treats the internal, psychological, and sensory experience of every single employee as a critical asset to be protected. As we dive deeper into the complexities of the digital age, organizations are realizing that diverse cognitive perspectives aren't just a nice-to-have HR initiative, they are an essential requirement for survival and innovation.
NWAF isn't just a checklist. It is the blueprint for a stable, productive, and truly inclusive future. It is, without exaggeration, the new operating system for the modern world of work.
It's the future we need.
And that matters profoundly for you listening to this right now. Whether you are neurodivergent and have spent your career exhausted by the disclosure tax, whether you manage a team and want to actually unlock their potential rather than policing their behavior, or whether you are just trying to navigate the complexities of the modern workforce. Understanding this massive shift gives you a profound advantage.
It allows you to see the architecture behind the daily friction you experience.
Exactly. It lets you know that the building can and should be fixed. Because as this operating system continues to install itself across the global workforce, it leaves us with a fascinating and perhaps provocative thought to carry forward into our own lives. Well, we spent this entire time talking about how NWAF uses environment-first design to stop blaming the individual for the failure of the corporate building. And we talked extensively about the UX for words becoming a mandatory standard for business communication to eliminate ambiguity.
Right.
But if our workplaces are finally upgrading their operating systems to be entirely environment-first, legally accountable, and neurologically inclusive, how long until this structural shift leads out of the office and into the public square?
That is an incredible question.
Will the UX for words eventually become the mandatory standard for how governments write legislation, ending the era of intentionally confusing legal jargon? Will it dictate how complex medical systems communicate diagnoses and treatment plans to overwhelmed patients?
Will it fundamentally change how we design our civic infrastructure, our public transport, our community spaces?
Exactly. If we finally learn how to fix the system of work, rather than forcing the person to bear the weight of a broken design, perhaps we are just fixing the office. Perhaps we're creating the blueprints to fix the structural integrity of society itself.